A man twice his size stepped directly in front of him, chest pushed out, arms crossed, eyes locked. The kind of stance that says, "I want a reaction. You think you're tough." The man's voice was loud enough for the whole room to hear. He wanted an audience. He got one. People turned. Phones came out. Whispers spread. "You're just an actor," the man continued. "You play fighters in movies. You're not a real one." He smiled at his friends. They smiled back. The room waited. Everyone expected anger. Everyone expected ego. Everyone expected a scene. What they got was silence. Keanu Reeves stood completely still. No clenched jaw. No raised voice. No step forward. Just two eyes, calm, steady, unreadable. The kind of calm that doesn't come from personality. It comes from preparation. It comes from thousands of hours on the mat. From bleeding through training sessions nobody filmed. From getting choked out, tapped out, and knocked down. And choosing to get back up every single time. The man mistook that silence for weakness. That was his first mistake. He leaned in closer. "What's wrong?" Nothing to say. More laughter from the crowd. Keanu looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. With something far more dangerous, patience. See, most people react. They protect their ego. They match the energy in the room. But Keanu had learned something years ago on cold gym floors, long before any camera ever rolled. The fighter who stays calm always has the advantage. Because rage is loud and predictable. Discipline is quiet and unstoppable. The man was performing for the crowd. Keanu wasn't performing at all. And that difference, that one invisible difference between them, was about to become very, very visible. The crowd didn't know what they were watching yet. They thought this was embarrassment. They thought this was a famous man being humbled in public. They had no idea. They were watching a storm that hadn't moved yet. Still. Quiet. Absolute. And in about 30 seconds, everything in that room was going to change. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with? Let's go back. Long before that room, long before the crowd, long before the cameras and the fame, before any of it, there was just a young man. Quiet. Overlooked. Underestimated. Keanu Reeves didn't grow up with confidence handed to him. He grew up with struggle. His father left when he was 3. His family moved constantly. He had dyslexia that made school feel like a battlefield every single day. Teachers doubted him. Classmates dismissed him. The world looked at him and saw nothing special. But here is what the world missed. While others were busy judging the outside, Keanu was building the inside. Quietly. Stubbornly. Without asking anyone's permission. He discovered martial arts not as a hobby, not as a phase, but as a language that didn't care about dyslexia, a language that didn't care about your last name, a language spoken only in sweat, discipline, and hours. He trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under world-class instructors. He studied judo, the art of using your opponent's force against them. He trained in wushu, in tactical movement, in close quarters combat. And when the John Wick franchise came along, most actors would have shown up, learned a few moves, and trusted the camera angles to do the rest. Not Keanu. He put in over 1,800 hours of training, 1,900 hours. That is not preparation for a role. That is the dedication of a man who decided, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to actually become it. His tactical shooting trainer, Taron Butler, said something that stopped people cold when they heard it. Keanu trained harder than any Navy SEAL I've ever worked with. Read that again. Not harder than most actors. Harder than Navy SEALs. Men whose entire lives are built around physical and mental discipline. And Keanu, a movie star, a man who could have coasted entirely on his name, outworked them. But here is the part nobody talks about. He didn't train to impress anyone. No social media posts from the gym. No shirtless photos showing the results. No interviews bragging about the hours. He trained because he believed in one thing completely. You should be what you say you are. If you're going to stand on a screen and show the world a warrior, become one. If you're going to earn people's trust, deserve it. If you're going to carry a reputation, build the foundation underneath it first. That philosophy didn't start with John Wick. It started on cold gym floors when he was young and unknown and nobody was watching. It started in the moments that never make headlines. The 5 a.m. sessions. The injuries trained through. The days when every muscle said stop, and he said one more round. So when that man stood in front of him in that room, laughing, performing, assuming, he wasn't just underestimating a celebrity. He was underestimating 2 decades of invisible work. He was underestimating every early morning, every hard session. Every time Keanu chose discipline over comfort. Every single one of those moments had been building, quietly, silently, completely, toward this one. The crowd still thought they were watching an actor being mocked. They had no idea they were standing in the presence of someone who had spent years becoming exactly what that man assumed he wasn't. Real, trained, ready, and dangerously, beautifully calm. Do you believe in doing the work quietly, even when no one is watching? The room had shifted now. What started as background noise, a confrontation in the corner, had become the main event. People stopped their conversations. Drinks were set down. Eyes moved toward the two men. The crowd smelled something in the air, not danger, drama, and in a world addicted to reaction, drama is currency. The man wasn't done. If anything, the silence from Keanu had made him bolder. That's how ego works. When it doesn't get resistance, it doesn't back down. It expands. He took another step forward. Close enough now that the space between them was almost nothing. I've seen your movies, he said slowly, performing every word, all that jumping around, all that shooting. He shook his head like a man explaining something obvious to a child. That's not real. That's choreography. Stunt coordinators. Camera tricks. He turned slightly to his friends, just enough to make sure they were still watching. They were. They always are, for men like this. You've never been in a real fight, he continued. You've never felt real pressure. Everything in your life has been scripted. The crowd shifted. Some people nodded. Some people filmed. Some people waited, hoping Keanu would finally snap. Give them something to post. Give them something to talk about. Give them the reaction this man was engineering so carefully. But Keanu Reeves had been here before. Not in this room, but in this moment. The moment where the world tries to reduce you. Where someone builds themselves up by tearing you down. Where the crowd waits to see if you'll become what they expect, or something they didn't see coming. He had felt this long before fame. He felt it as a kid who couldn't read fast enough. He felt it in audition rooms where casting directors looked straight through him. He felt it after early movies that critics destroyed. He felt it in the personal tragedies that broke him privately, while the world watched publicly. Grief that would have shattered most people. Loss that would have justified anger for a lifetime. And through all of it, he never became hard. He never became cruel. He never became the kind of man who needed to make others feel small to feel large himself. That choice, made over and over again through real pain, was the most disciplined thing about him. Not his fighting technique. His character. One of his jiu-jitsu instructors told a story once. Early in training, another student, bigger, more experienced, hungry to prove something, went after Keanu hard. Too hard. Not training hard. Disrespect hard. The kind of role where the message isn't let's get better together. It's let me remind you where you stand. Everyone on the mat felt it. Everyone waited to see what Keanu would do. He tapped when he needed to tap. He reset. He kept training. After the session, the instructor pulled him aside. He was out of line. You know that, right? Keanu nodded once. So why didn't you say anything? Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I didn't need to. That story matters here. Because that same energy, that same quiet, loaded, deeply intentional patience, was what filled the room now. The man kept talking. He was louder now, more theatrical, more committed to the performance he had started, and couldn't figure out how to end. He mocked the way Keanu stood. He mocked the humility. He called it weakness dressed up as wisdom, and the crowd, the way crowds always do, started to lean his direction. Because volume feels like confidence. Because aggression reads like strength. Because most people have been taught to confuse noise for power. But there were a few people in that room watching differently. A woman near the back, arms folded, studying Keanu's eyes. An older man by the wall who had seen enough of life to recognize what stillness like that actually meant. A young guy near the door who would later say, I didn't know what was about to happen, but I knew something was. Because there is a feeling that comes before things change. A pressure in the air, a held breath, a silence underneath all the noise. The man was still talking, still performing, still feeding on the crowd's energy like it was oxygen. He had been going for several minutes now, and in all that time, Keanu had not moved, had not blinked with anger, had not shifted his weight with impatience. He simply stood, present, grounded, completely terrifyingly ready. The man finally ran out of words. He spread his hands wide, the universal gesture of, well, what do you have to say for yourself? The room held its breath. Keanu looked at him, not with anger, not with amusement, not with the performance the man had been hoping to trigger. He looked at him the way a mountain looks at weather, unmoved, unbothered, ancient in its stillness. And then, very quietly, he spoke. Has someone ever tried to humiliate you publicly, and you chose silence over reaction? What happened next? The words Keanu spoke were not loud. They didn't need to be. In a room that had been filled with noise, with performance, with the desperate energy of a man trying to be seen. A quiet voice hits harder than a shout. He said only 4 words. "Are you finished now?" Not aggressive, not sarcastic, not dripping with the kind of venom the moment seemed to call for. Just a question, simple, direct, devastating in its calm. The man blinked. For the first time since this started, he didn't have an immediate answer, because he had prepared for anger. He had prepared for defensiveness. He had prepared for embarrassment, the kind that makes a man loud and clumsy and easy to manipulate. He had not prepared for this, for someone who simply wasn't affected. And that gap between what he expected and what he got cracked something open in the room. People felt it. The woman near the back unfolded her arms. The older man by the wall straightened slightly. The young guy near the door stopped leaning. The energy didn't shift loudly. It shifted the way tides shift, slow, massive, and completely unstoppable. The man recovered quickly, or tried to, finish it. He repeated, a smile returning to his face. He looked back at his friends, but this time the look lasted a half-second too long. Searching for the energy he had before, finding slightly less of it. "I'm just getting started," he said, and he moved. Not a wild swing, not a Hollywood lunge, a real move, fast, deliberate, the kind that comes from someone who has been in physical confrontations before, someone who believed, completely, that what was about to happen was already decided. What happened next lasted less than 4 seconds. Later, the people who were there would struggle to describe it accurately. Not because it was confusing, but because it was so clean, so efficient, so completely without waste. There was no dramatic exchange, no back and forth, no movie moment where both men demonstrate their skills equally before one finally wins. There was a movement, a redirect, a shift of weight so precise it seemed almost gentle, and then the man was on the ground, face down, arm locked, completely controlled, not hurt, not humiliated beyond what the moment required, just stopped. The way you stop something dangerous before it becomes a disaster. Keanu held the position for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough for the man to understand, short enough to show this was never about punishment. Then he released him, stepped back, straightened his jacket, and said, "I didn't come here for this." The room was absolutely silent. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels full. Packed with realization, with recalibration, with the collective understanding of people who had just seen something real, in a world that had almost forgotten what real looks like. Someone started to clap, then another person. Not the wild applause of entertainment, but something quieter, more genuine. The kind of sound a room makes when it witnesses not a performance, but a truth. The man got up slowly. His friends didn't rush to help him. He straightened, looked at Keanu, and for the first time since this entire thing began, he had nothing to say, no audience left to perform for, no script left to follow. Just a man standing across from another man, one of them suddenly, painfully aware of how wrong he had been. Keanu didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't look around the room for validation. He simply looked at the man with the same calm he had carried from the very beginning. And then he did something nobody expected. He extended his hand. Open, steady, without condition. Not as a trophy moment. Not for the crowd. But because that is who Keanu Reeves is when the cameras aren't rolling. When no one is writing a script. When the only thing left in the room is character, and what you choose to do with yours. The man stared at the hand. The room held its breath again. What happened next would change both of them. If someone disrespected you publicly, and you had every right to walk away, would you still offer your hand? Or has the world made that too hard? The man stared at the outstretched hand. 3 seconds passed, then 5. The room didn't breathe. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even lifted a phone. Because some moments are too real for content. Too raw for a caption. Too human for a highlight reel. This was one of them. The man's jaw tightened. You could see it. The war happening inside him. Between ego and honesty. Between pride and truth. Between the person he had been performing as, and the person he actually was underneath all of it. That war is never easy. It is especially hard when 50 people are watching you fight it. His eyes moved to his friends. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't performing either. They were just watching. Waiting to see who their friend actually was, when there was nothing left to hide behind. He took the hand, slowly, stiffly, like a man picking up something heavy he wasn't sure he deserved to carry. But he took it. And something in the room, some invisible, collective tension that had been coiling for the last 10 minutes, released. Not with noise, with something better, with relief. Keanu shook his hand once, firm, brief, real, no speech. No lesson delivered from a podium. No moment stretched for effect. Just 2 men, on the other side of something difficult, choosing to be decent. He turned and walked toward the exit. No entourage, no dramatic pause at the door, no final look back over the shoulder. Just a man in a worn jacket and old sneakers walking the same way he had walked in, quietly. Without performance, without need. But the story didn't end there. Because the truth about moments like this is that they don't stay in the room where they happen. They travel. A video surfaced online. Not the full incident, just a fragment. 20 seconds. Shaky phone footage from across the room. But 20 seconds was enough. Within hours, millions of views. Within a day, it was everywhere. News articles, talk shows, social media threads that went on for thousands of comments. And every single conversation circled back to the same question. Who does that? Who gets publicly mocked, physically provoked, completely disrespected, and responds by offering their hand? The internet, predictably, split. Some people called it staged. Some called it weakness dressed as wisdom, the same accusation the man in the room had made before he ended up on the floor. But most people, the quiet majority who don't comment loudly but feel things deeply, recognized something in that moment. Something they had stopped believing still existed. Genuine character. Not performed for cameras, not calculated for public approval, not shaped by what a publicist suggested or a brand required, just a human being, tested in real time, choosing grace when force had already proven itself available. One comment rose above the noise. It was written by a veteran, a man who had spent years in combat, who had seen real pressure and real violence and real consequence. He wrote simply, "The most dangerous people I have ever known were also the gentlest." Because they had nothing to prove. That comment was shared over 2 million times, because it named something people had felt but couldn't say. That real strength, the kind built through genuine discipline and real sacrifice, doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need the crowd's approval. It doesn't need the last word. It doesn't need to leave the other person broken to feel whole. Real strength extends a hand, even when it doesn't have to, especially when it doesn't have to. Keanu never commented on the video publicly. No statement, no interview, no post. The silence itself said everything. Because here is the bigger truth, the one that video accidentally revealed to millions of people who had forgotten it. How you treat the moment after you win says everything about who you are. Anyone can be humble before the test. It costs nothing to be kind when kindness is easy. But in the moment when you have every right to be something else, when the crowd would understand, when ego would be forgiven and pride would be applauded, what do you choose? That choice made in 4 seconds told the world more about Keanu Reeves than 20 years of interviews ever had. He didn't win the room with his hands. He won it with something that can't be trained in any gym, can't be built in any number of hours on any mat, something rarer than skill, rarer than talent, rarer than fame, dignity, the quiet, unshakable, unconditional kind, the kind that doesn't ask for an audience, the kind that shows up, whether 50 people are watching or none. Do you think true strength is shown in how you fight, or in what you do after you've already won? 3 days passed. The video had traveled everywhere. But Keanu Reeves had done something the internet hadn't expected. Nothing. No statement. No appearance. No carefully worded post designed to shape the narrative. While the world argued about what happened in that room, he simply went back to his life. Training in the morning. Work in the afternoon. The same routine. The same discipline. The same invisibility he had always preferred over spectacle. But something had been set in motion. Something that couldn't be stopped by silence, no matter how intentional. The man's name was Daniel, 34 years old, former college athlete. A man who had spent most of his life being the biggest presence in every room he entered. Not because he was cruel by nature, but because somewhere along the way, he had learned that dominance was protection. That if you controlled the room couldn't hurt you. That if you made yourself loud enough, nobody would notice what the noise was covering. He had been performing that version of himself for so long, he had almost forgotten it was a performance. Almost. The morning after the video went viral, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. Phone off, curtains drawn, coffee going cold on the table in front of him. He had watched the footage 17 times. Not with anger, with something much harder to sit with. Honesty. He watched himself perform, watched himself feed on the crowd, watched himself mistake volume for strength, and an audience for meaning. And then he watched the hand, extended toward him after everything, open, steady, without condition. He had taken it in the room because the moment demanded something from him, and for once in a very long time, he had responded to what a moment actually needed instead of what his ego wanted. But alone in his apartment, he finally understood what that hand had really been offering. Not a truce, not a photo opportunity. A door. He made a decision. He found a contact, sent a message. 3 sentences, no performance. No explanation. Just, I was wrong. I know that now. I'd like to make it right if you're open to it. He didn't expect a response. Men like the one he had tried to humiliate, men with every reason to close the door, usually do. He sat with that expectation for 2 days, learning to be uncomfortable in it, learning that accountability without guarantee of forgiveness is still accountability worth practicing. On the 3rd day, a message came back, also 3 sentences. Come to the gym Saturday morning. 6 a.m. Bring nothing but yourself. What happened that Saturday morning was never filmed. No cameras, no audience, no content to post. Just 2 men on a mat, one teaching, one learning. For 3 hours, Keanu Reeves showed Daniel everything. Not to prove a point. Not to remind him of the distance between them. But because teaching is the most honest expression of respect. It says, I believe you are worth the investment. He showed him the fundamentals of Jiu-Jitsu, the philosophy behind the movement. The way real discipline feels different from performed confidence, quieter, heavier, more permanent. At the end of the session, both men sat on the mat, breathing hard, saying little, the way people sit together when words would only reduce what just happened. Finally, Daniel spoke. Why did you do this? He asked, not ungratefully, genuinely. The way a man asks a question when he actually needs the answer. Keanu was quiet for a moment. The way he is always quiet before something real. Then he said, because somebody did it for me once. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Because Daniel understood immediately that this was not about that room, not about that video, not about public redemption or private score settling. This was about a chain, a long, invisible chain of people choosing, in moments when they didn't have to extend something forward instead of withhold it. Generosity passed from one person to the next, not because it was deserved, because that is how character travels through the world. Keanu stood up, offered his hand again. The same hand, the same steadiness, the same complete absence of condition. This time, Daniel took it without hesitation, without the war, without the weight, just one man choosing clearly, finally, fully who he wanted to be. And that decision, made on a quiet gym mat on a Saturday morning, with no audience, no camera, no applause, was the most important thing that happened in this entire story. Not the confrontation, not the takedown, not the viral video seen by millions. This, 2 people, 1 choice, 0 witnesses. Because real change never happens in front of a crowd. It happens in the moments nobody sees. In the rooms nobody films. In the quiet, where who you actually are finally gets to meet who you always had the potential to become. Have you ever been given a second chance you didn't deserve and let it change you? Or given one to someone else? 6 months later, no viral moment announced it. No headline marked it. No algorithm pushed it to the top of anyone's feed. It simply happened. The way the most important things always do, quietly, without permission from the world, without waiting for applause. Daniel walked into that same gym, not as a student this time, as a volunteer instructor. Every Saturday morning, the same 6 a.m., he showed up to teach underprivileged kids. The same fundamentals he had learned on that mat. Discipline, patience. The difference between real strength and performed confidence. He taught them the way Keanu had taught him, not from a place of superiority, but from a place of genuine investment. I believe you are worth the time. I believe you are worth the effort. I believe in who you can become. He never mentioned the video, never mentioned Keanu by name, never used the story as a credential. He just showed up every week, same time, same mat, same quiet commitment. One of the kids asked him once, why do you come here every week? You don't get paid for this. Daniel thought about it for a moment. The real answer was long and complicated and full of a story. This 11-year-old didn't need to carry, so he gave him the true part, the part that mattered. Because somebody showed up for me once, he said, when they didn't have to, and it changed everything. The kid nodded slowly. The way kids nod when they don't fully understand the words, but completely understand the feeling behind them. Keanu never knew about the Saturday classes, not because Daniel hid them, but because he never thought to make them part of a story that included Keanu. Because they weren't. They were his own story now, his own chain, his own door opened and held for someone else. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. One person chooses grace in a moment they didn't have to. And that choice, invisible, unrecorded, unrewarded, moves forward through the world in ways neither person will ever fully see. There is something this entire story has been building toward. Not the takedown, not the handshake, not the Saturday morning on the mat. Something simpler. Something you already know. but perhaps needed to be reminded of. You don't have to be Keanu Reeves to live like this. You don't need his discipline, his training, his particular brand of quiet, leather jacket confidence. You just need to make one decision in one moment. That costs you something. Choose patience when reaction is easier. Choose grace when ego is louder. Choose to extend a hand when you have every right to walk away. Not for the crowd. Not for the video. Not for the version of yourself you want the world to see. For the version of yourself you have to live with, in the quiet, when no one is watching. Keanu Reeves is not remarkable because he is famous. He is remarkable because fame never changed. The thing that was already there before it arrived. That 11-year-old boy, overlooked, struggling building something in the silence, never left. He is still there, showing up to the gym at 5 a.m., choosing humility over performance. Extending his hand in rooms where most people would clench their fist. Not because it is easy, because he decided, a long time ago, that the kind of person he wanted to be was worth more than the approval of any room. And that is the whole story, not just Keanu's, yours. Every time you choose dignity when disrespect would be easier. Every time you stay calm when the crowd expects a reaction. Every time you invest in someone, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You are building something invisible, permanent, more powerful than anything that could ever go viral. Character, the quiet kind, the real kind, the kind that outlasts every room, every crowd, every moment of noise. Build it in the silence. Carry it everywhere. And when the moment comes, offer your hand.